So here's my experience with this, and here's the big opportunity. The coaching model that's out there hasn't changed for 30 years. You get certified on an assessment tool. A company charges you $150 for a licensing fee, whether it's DISC or Core Clarity. With Gallup, you get the basic $22 or $49, but then you get all this stuff you've got to wade through and interpret. So now you need a consultant, and that consultant doesn't come cheap. And now the consultant stands in between you and the information. They can be the wizard that helps you figure it all out, which is great. And what I found is that 80% of what I do, for the most part, is just fundamental stuff. What are the strengths? Why do we use it? What's a ring? All of that stuff. You don't need me to walk you through that. And then the other big challenge we have, and we had this with the FAA years ago, is that managers don't feel equipped. Once you go through the training and you go through all the strengths and the combinations and the collisions and all of that, they go, oh my God, how am I going to do this on my own? The revelation to me was the TED Talk of George Land and this whole genius thing, that from 3 to 5 years old, we operated in this creative zone that 98% of 3 to 5 year olds tested as geniuses. And then school comes along, and Sir Ken Robinson's TED Talk is worth watching as well, which is part of the videos that I provide as the context. And so now you go through this whole life of trying to get the right answers, fitting in, conforming, and you lose who you are. I mean, that's why we have midlife crises, right? 45 years of age to 60 years of age, someone says, okay, I'm successful but bored, or I feel trapped in my role and I don't know how to reinvent. And Simon Sinek comes up and says, start with why. That's a corporate thing, but people have taken that to individuals, and that's wrong. That's not the right place to start. We always start with who. Know thyself. That's the very first premise and principle in learning how to be all that you were designed to be. And then Maslow says that what we were meant to be, what we can become, we must become. Not as an external command, but as an internal drive. Now, the other element is this psycho-cybernetics that started in the 1950s found that our brain is a goal-seeking organ. And what cybernetics is basically servo mechanisms. A servo mechanism is something we developed in the 40s to make sure that missiles actually hit their target, or that the moon rocket made it to the moon. It's a self-correcting device that when you give it the coordinates of where you want it to go, it self-corrects. Your thermostat is a servo mechanism. You set the temperature and it automatically adjusts to stay at that range. So what performance science found, and these are pilots, Navy SEALs, and athletes, is that if you have a picture of your best performance, your ideal performance, your brain simulates that, and it fires the same parts in the brain, if you take them through an fMRI, as actually doing it. You can go on YouTube and see a rehearsal of Blue Angels around a table with their eyes closed, holding an imaginary joystick, and the commander walking them through the whole flight routine and practicing it. That's why they built simulators for airplanes. I've been in a DC-10 flight simulator. It was the most intense, sweat producing. I had to fly into LAX airport in the evening. And the first time, I crashed it. The second time I crashed it. The third time I landed, but blew out most of the tires. So, and that whole feeling, and I was getting nauseous too, the whole thing. That reality is something that people have learned to do. I was sitting on an airplane next to a musician, who was going through the whole performance next to me with his eyes closed, and he was humming and doing his fingers and all that. And I'm watching this. And so I had to ask afterwards, I said, so what were you doing? But we don't do it for ourselves. So if we can simplify this process to not having to learn all the dynamics of the strengths or the ins and outs of DISC or Enneagram and all that, and use it to help people filter down to a very succinct description of what they look like at their best, then that tells the brain, that gives the brain an image. We've all heard of selective awareness, and you've probably experienced it if you had a vacation you wanted to take or a car you wanted to buy. And have you experienced where all of a sudden you see more of that around? That's the brain filtering in the things it wants. So the brain is an incredible goal-seeking organ. Now, 99% of people don't study themselves. They don't keep a journal. They don't take notes on good days, bad days. So you might consider that every one of those days is like a sandcastle. They built something, but by the next day, there's nothing for it to maintain itself. So it just washes away. There's a lot of consulting that calls these default days versus intentional days. We've all heard of intentional and default, or on purpose or purpose driven versus not. 99% of people are on autopilot. They just do the same thing every day. It's the treadmill. Now, it's one value to have that reflective mind. You know, the unstudied life is not a very valuable life. You know, the lack of self-awareness, but it's even better if you're reflecting against a standard, an aspirational standard. So the way you do that, or the way we do it, is very simple. We create the paragraph. Then you validate the description with others. Is this what I look like at my best? Because you don't know. Even with those assessments, they tell you, but there's no process that any of these assessment tools use to make it you, to personalize it and get it so that it's clear, it's concise, and it connects to you. And then that external validating process is part of the honing in and getting that picture the best. So now we've simplified it. We're boiling it down to a paragraph everybody can understand. And then we can validate it. And now it's the feedback. So the two pieces are reinforcing and feedback, reinforcing and feedback. So on a personal level, that mechanism is called bookend days. In the morning, you read your paragraph. Now, if we're coaching over time, what we're going to do is not only get the message to the brain, but we're going to link it to peak moments in your life. So we've got another part of looking at 6 elements of your life and crossroads, and now connecting it to story. So you've got message, you've got story, but inside of that story is memory, history, and muscle memory. And so that's part of the rehearsal part, and remembering those peak moments. And then there's the reflective part. At the end of the day, you just look at the day and ask yourself, where did I show up at my best? What did that look like? And where did I get in my own way? And what did that look like? That simple process that's all it is. And then if managers build it into a weekly conversation with little icebreakers. Tony came from a company that had zero harm as one of their values. And before every meeting, they would talk about a safety issue. You know, the exits are here if something happens, and tell a story of why it's important for us to know that. And it was one of that company's most effective cultural things because it was supported and reinforced. We're starting to do this with project teams. where the project teams in their big rooms, they call it big rooms, where they all work together and they have a weekly meeting. Well, they'll have a different person read their genius paragraph and have the group or a new person introduce themselves through their genius portrait. So building it into the weekly process is part of the process. So bookend days and Kaizen, which is continuous incremental improvement, the compound effect. So bookend days is part of that. The most control you have is either at the beginning of the day or the end of the day. And then I weekly will make adjustments to my paragraph, or I'll add a new story, a more current story to it that reinforces it. So you get this compounding effect over time because your brain is a servo mechanism. And if you give the brain better information, clearer information on where it needs to go. So the business model is simplify, give the user most of the control, give them the tools to do 80% of the work, and lower the cost so that it's a no-brainer and you can scale it all the way through the organization instead of just doing executive level and senior management, because that's typically as far as it goes. You'll get a few companies that will take it throughout. I've had a few companies take it throughout the organization, but when you look at what they've spent on materials and licensing fees and what they could have done with that, we're playing a low threshold, highly intuitive, give most of the control to the user, low cost approach to gain volume. That's what we're trying to do. So part of the flywheel effect is make it easy, lower the threshold, make it so an 8th grader can do this, which we've done, make it so low cost. And then the more people we have, the more feedback we're getting as to which traits really resonate the best, which ones don't. And so we'll continue to upgrade. Then we'll be able to continue to invest in mapping DISC, mapping Enneagram, so that now there's one place that you can go, no matter what system you have, you can get everybody on the same page with a simple common language. So part of the model is that individuals can access it free. They can get and create their genius portrait and the kryptonite portrait. There will be a premium version for individuals. And then the fees really come in when we're dealing with teams and with companies. And even at that, it's so low cost that people are still asking, are you sure? And they're asking because their reference point is the current consulting coaching model. What we want for coaches is we want to lower. So the normal certification cost for a coach is $6,000 to $10,000. Well, we want to drop that down considerably and allow 80% of people to be facilitators. You don't have to be wonks on the assessment. So people can get out faster. The model we're using is what we call an inductive model versus deductive. The difference is between what deductive would do is teach you all of the principles you need to know to how to ride a bike. Inductive is we get you on the bike and then we facilitate you, give you some training wheels, and you figure it out. That's what we find that sticks. So it's a completely different, I mean, it's 180 degrees different than the current coaching models. And some of you have been watching me do this for a while. I think, Barbie, you guys have watched me the longest in this group. So you've seen it evolve quite a bit.
Yep. I think I said this early on, but I feel like, you commented earlier that the why here is that it makes it easier for you to understand and know thyself. But I'm really excited by the ability to have those paragraphs so people can communicate to each other about themselves. And I think that this does that in a way that nothing we've looked at before has. So appreciate that.
Take care, guys.
Bye, guys.
Thank you so
Thanks,
much.
everybody.
Yep.